What's poppin', everyone? This is your boy DezDakinG back again with another episode of the King Talk TV podcast. Today I have a special guest. Her name is Kathy Gibbens, friend of mine. She has a podcast on logical fallacies. Today, that's what we're going to talk about: logical fallacies. A lot of people don't know what logical fallacies are, and they don't know how it impacts our world and how it impacts our thinking. So I thought this was a great topic to discuss. Kathy is an expert on this, and apparently there are hundreds of logical fallacies out there. But we're only going to discuss five, and it should be a great informative show for you all. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please consider giving this a like and subscribing. If you're watching this live on Instagram, please feel free to engage, ask questions, and it's going to be a great show. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on Kathy, and we're going to get this show on the road. Kathy.
Hey, Des, how are you?
I am wonderful. How are you doing today?
I am great. Thank you. It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time out to join me today. I think your husband told me you guys are out of town doing a lot of traveling, right?
We are out of town. We're visiting some friends in Texas right now, actually.
Awesome. I know you're really, really hot out there.
I am missing Colorado. I will not lie. I'm missing the nice, cooler weather without the humidity. I mean, it's nice. We're loving it here, but oh yeah, the weather is a contender for sure.
A contender. That's a good word. That's a good word. Well, it's not too cold in Colorado, to be honest. It's a pretty hot day today. So even if you were here, you'll probably still be in the same situation, Kathy.
But we don't have the humidity up there. So that's the thing that it does make a difference, but it's all good. It's all good.
Awesome. Well, again, I am happy that you're with me, and I thank you for taking the time out to join me today. Not going to hold you too long, but I did want to dive into your specialty, which is logical fallacies. Quick story, real quick. I was telling a friend of mine yesterday that I was having a show. I was like, yeah, I'm having a podcast. I got a great guest. We're going to talk about logical fallacies. And she was like, oh, okay. What are logical fallacies? And I was like, oh, wow. Me being naive, thinking that, fallacies were a common thing. Logical fallacies were, a well-known thing, but they're obviously not. People don't know what logical fallacies are, and they don't know that they are probably committing these fallacies all the time, including me, all the time. So, so what got you into logical fallacies, and why start a whole podcast devoted to just that, Kathy?
I think it's a fantastic question. And your friend is not alone in not knowing what they are. In fact, I don't even know that I had ever heard the term logical fallacies or really had registered with me until just a couple years ago. Noble and I, my husband and my daughter, Lena, right? So we have a daughter who we homeschool, and in 7th grade, there was this book that she read. It was called The Fallacy Detective, and I name it because a lot of times parents are interested in getting this book, but it was all about logical fallacies. And here's the thing that's so interesting. This kind of explains how I got started and why I decided to do this. So the year that she read that book was the 2019-2020 school year, which, as we all know, that's when the pandemic started. We went into a presidential election. Craziness started happening online. We had the internet fact checkers, right? The country was locked down, fear everywhere, blah, blah, blah. And what was so interesting to me was these kids. So she meets once a week with about a class of about 10 kids. And I watched these kids who had read this book and had learned not a whole bunch of logical fallacies. So they learned about 30 of them. And just having learned that little group of 30 different fallacies and learning how to recognize them and learning how to think, they went through that pandemic so differently than what I observed other friends of theirs that didn't have that training, that were in public school, that had a very different experience. And the thing that I realized is because these kids had learned just a few simple tools for how to think. And so they were able to analyze the messages that were coming at them very differently. You sit down and watch a presidential debate with kids who have been taught how to think, and with kids who just know a few simple skills of recognizing the logical fallacies. In fact, we did bingo with them. We did a bingo card with different logical fallacies on, and they were to watch a presidential debate and mark off the bingo card every time they saw a logical fallacy. And the thing I realized, I watched these kids and I'm like, you can't fool them. There's no fooling somebody, even a 7th grade kid, if they have some skills of thinking, if they just know just the basics. We're not talking philosophy majors or anything here. We're just talking the basics of good thinking and how to think. And then, so then we go into 2021, right? And things just accelerate in the country. And we're watching, there's just crazy stuff happening in the country. And I'm watching these kids and I'm watching what's happening. Now, mind you, this was the first time I had learned about logical fallacies. And if you want, we can get into the story of why we're not taught this stuff in school, because it's a really interesting story. But so I'm learning it for the first time. And now I'm watching the world with completely different eyes. And I'm like, oh my goodness, people are using bad thinking all the time, and we're all falling for it. We're all falling for it over and over and over again. It takes 2 minutes on social media. Read the comment section of, most posts, and you'll see bad thinking. You'll see logical errors. And so that was when I realized I have a heart for this next generation, Gen Z, that's growing up in this day and age. They are bombarded with manipulation, with propaganda, with bad thinking, with bad logic, with messaging. They are bombarded with it on all sides. And if we don't give them the skills to learn how to filter it, to learn how to, that's my podcast, filter it through a brain cell, to learn how to think about it, it takes you on an emotional, it's like you get spun emotionally. It's a total emotional roller coaster that you go on. And so I said, well, I'm just a homeschool mom, but I can start a podcast. And so I started a podcast where in short, fun episodes, I teach logical fallacies and how to think. And my audience is really families. In my heart, in my mind, I want to talk to families who have middle schoolers and high schoolers so that the family can learn it together and hopefully have good conversations with their kids and talk about these things as they're hearing them in society, in news, on social media. And so that's how I got started. And I will just start with the definition because I think this is really important. It's a good question. What is a logical fallacy? So if we break the word down, logical just has to do with your mind and with thinking, and a fallacy is just an error. So a logical fallacy is an error in thinking. It's just a way that we make mistakes in our arguments or in our logic. And when I started, I thought I knew there was probably more than 30 that my daughter had learned, but I had no idea. There's more than 300 different ways that we can think poorly, that we can think bad. So I dove into it, and the podcast has taken off. We're almost at 300,000 downloads, which is amazing to me. And it makes me so happy to be able to contribute something to this next generation so that they can strengthen their mind. Scripture tells us to take every thought captive. Scripture tells us the number one commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, right? We're to love God with our mind. And how can we do that if we don't know how to think? Proverbs says it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search it out, right? So we have to have wisdom. We have to search for wisdom and know how to apply truth. So anyways, that was a long answer, but that's how I got started.
That's very fascinating, and it's good to hear that there are people like you out there who are taking it upon themselves to put out this type of education, because to my knowledge, I don't even think any logic class or any type of thinking class was offered like in public school, like high school, middle school, or anything like that back in my time when I was in public school. But I saw your husband on here and he posted, he said 300,000 downloads. That is amazing. And that right there is a testament to people who are just sick of, the mental manipulation that goes on with the mainstream media, and just people in general just being mind controlled and not even know they're being mind controlled. But now people like you are putting out educational videos on just basic reasoning skills on how to process information, and that's great. I read your quote on your Instagram page, and it says, "I help parents teach their teens critical thinking in a world that seems to have lost its mind." And I think that's great, and it really sums up what's going on in the world today. But before we get into the few of the fallacies, I do want you to tell your story about why you think or why you believe children aren't being taught these things. But what is the type of feedback that you're getting from parents putting out this content?
Yeah, no, parents are so thankful to have it as a tool, because they're like me. A lot of parents are just like me. We didn't get this. I'm like you. I went to a great school. I went to a private Christian school. So I had a really good education. I was never taught this. It just wasn't part of the curriculum. And most parents that I talk to are in that same position. They're like, I didn't learn this, but now that once your eyes are open, once you learn a couple of these and you start seeing them, this is what I tell people. I say, once you start to realize that you're going to see them everywhere, and once you start seeing them everywhere, you're going to realize how important this is. And so the biggest thing is that parents are just thankful. They're thankful to have a resource. They're thankful to have a tool that they can use with their kids so that they can learn alongside their kids. And it opens the door to having some really cool conversations, which is part of what I love, because then they can have the conversation of, oh, I read that. Do you think that that's right? Do you think that's true? Right? Is that really true? And now you can have a conversation with your kids and practice the skills of good thinking. So that's the feedback that I've been getting, and I love it. I love it, because that's exactly what I was hoping for. So let me give you the background real quickly
Okay.
Because this used to be considered very much an important part of education, is to learn how to think, to have good thinking and good debate skills. So here's the story. So it goes back to the little country of Prussia before it was Germany. So it's kind of in the place of where Germany was at. And the Prussian army, the way that Prussia made all of their money for their economy is through their army. The army was really good. And so they would rent out their army to other countries, and their Prussian army would fight with other countries, whoever paid the most, and they would always win. And so this is how the country made its living, made its money, until they had this battle in the 1800s against Napoleon, and the Prussian army lost, and it was a devastating loss. And the king of Prussia was like, this is bad. We can't have this. If word gets out that the Prussian army lost or is losing, now we're not going to make money, because nobody's going to hire our army again. And so he called together a little, consult of his people and said, figure out what happened. Why did we lose? And what he discovered was that the soldiers were starting to pick and choose which orders they were follow and which generals that they were going to listen to. They were starting to think for themselves. And he said, well, we can't have this, right? My husband was in the military, he was in the infantry, and they have a saying that goes, salute and execute. If you're given an order, you say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and you go and you execute the order. You don't think about it. You don't decide if it's a good idea. You just do. So they said, okay, we can't have this. So again, he said, y'all need to formulate a system so that by the time the men who are going to be coming into our military are old enough, they will not think for themselves, that they will take orders and salute and execute. And so guess what they formulated? They came up with the very first, what they called kind of like a manufactured school system. It's what we now know of the K through 12 educational system. It's like a factory design where you put a kid on in kindergarten, and then they move to first grade and second grade. And school didn't used to be like that. They just developed that, and they put things in place like the teacher and the bells and classes and all this stuff. So they created this whole system so that for these 12 years of the kid's life, they would be trained in taking orders and in doing what somebody else said, so that by the time they're spit out, they make really good soldiers, they make good workers, they make good rule followers, order followers. And of course, they had to remove the part of the education where they taught thinking skills. Well, it worked, right? These soldiers that came out of this were great and they followed orders again. And so countries from around the world said, well, we want that too. So they sent people over to Prussia to study this system. And Horace Mann of the United States of America is the person who went from the US to go study it. And he brought it back, and the first place that they took it to was Massachusetts. And the people in Massachusetts didn't want to have anything to do with it. The parents showed up at the school with guns saying, no, we don't want this factory model of education. Because at the time they did one-room schoolhouses, right? It was a different form of education and it produced a really great result. Well, we all know how that happened, and this is how we got our government public school system. It was all solely designed around the concept of spitting out workers who wouldn't think for themselves, who wouldn't question, who would just follow orders, because people are a lot easier to control when they don't know how to think, when they don't know how to question, and they're just trained to take orders. Isn't that crazy? But that's kind of how it started. And that's why we're not taught these skills anymore. There's certain things that used to be in our education that's just not in our education anymore. And this is part of the reason why.
Wow, I never heard that story ever. That is crazy, but it makes a lot of sense.
Right.
It makes a lot of sense. And I'm not trying to dive off topic, Kathy, but if you're putting yourself in the shoes of a large entity like the government, wouldn't that be the smartest thing to do? If you're the government, you like you said, you want people who comply. You don't want people to rebel against you. So you want to bring up robots, so to speak, or people who are going to be easy to manipulate. Not necessarily, I guess, to manipulate, but easy to control. You don't want them to be courageous. You don't want entrepreneurs. You want people to just listen to what you're saying. You want exactly what you described, the K through 12 systematic education, right? Isn't that I'm not saying it's good, but isn't that kind of what you want as a government ultimately, is that type of system?
I think most governments, absolutely. I think it depends on the type of government. But I think most of the governments that we see in the world, sadly, yes, that is kind of their goal. Because most people in the government, what is their goal? Stay in power. It's power, right? And their whole goal is not, as it should be, looking out for the welfare of the people. It's about keeping themselves in power. Well, if your whole goal is really to keep yourself in power, then yeah, get a bunch of people that you can control. Yeah.
Right. Man, that's great information. I'm going to look way more into that after this show. Thank you for telling me that. Okay, so I sent you out 5 logical fallacies. Now, a while ago, I did my own video on logical fallacies. It was on these particular 5 that we're going to discuss. Prior to that, I heard about logical fallacies, but I didn't know too much about them, and I didn't know that they were hundreds of them. You know, I just thought there was maybe like a short list, but I didn't think that it was that many. You know, there are so many ways to be manipulated, or so many ways to have an error in your thought process, so to speak. So the first one I want to talk about is the appeal to emotion fallacy, which I think most people can relate to, because we all made decisions based strictly off emotions. And before you respond with your feedback on that, I want to read the definition that I looked up on it, if that's okay. So the appeal to emotion fallacy is, this fallacy occurs when one manipulates emotions in order to win an argument rather than using valid reasoning. It capitalizes on feelings to persuade an audience instead of relying on factual evidence or logical arguments. Like I said, I think this is probably the main fallacy used in the media to stir up votes, stir up buying this and not buying that. hate this person, love this person, give me money, don't give that person money. That is probably, in my opinion, the most powerful fallacy to use, to weaponize, to use against people. But what are your thoughts on this? And do you have any real life examples on how you've been affected by it, or how it's been used in history?
100%. I always say there's two really big enemies. The two biggest enemies to good thinking, one of them you hit is emotionalism. We are so easily manipulated by our emotions. And so here's a couple examples of them. Have you ever seen the commercials for the dog shelters where the dogs are skinny and you've got Sarah McLachlan in the arms of the angels playing in the background, sad music, and right? The whole commercial is meant to create feelings of pity for these dogs and feelings of guilt and feelings of sadness, right? So that whole thing is an appeal to an emotion to get you to send money to help support the dog shelters, right? So that's a good example of one. Another one is during COVID. So one of the messages that I saw a lot is grandma killers. You're going to kill grandma if you don't fill in the blank, right? You don't wash your hands, if you don't socially distance, if you don't get the vaccine, if you don't whatever. Well, that's an example of an appeal to emotion. It's fear. It's, this, oh, I don't want to kill grandma. Is that the best way to have explained it? Okay, maybe we need to be careful, right? Maybe we need to do this or that, but to throw in phrases like grandma killer is an appeal to fear. It's phrasing used for that. Every single war that's ever been fought have used appeals to emotion, right? Because you have to try to make whatever group hate the other group. And so we can, every country, including the US, has used some kind of appeal to emotion. If you look at World War II, everybody had to, or World War I, everybody had to do their part, and Rosie the Riveter and all the things. And we can say, well, maybe that's good. Maybe that needed to happen. Maybe it's still an appeal to emotion, right? It's still an appeal, because a lot of times people want to do that to get people to act rather than actually making a good case for, okay, here's a really good case for why we should go to war versus let's just get you to hate them so that you want to wipe them off the face of the earth, right? You see the difference between the two? So those are a few examples that I've seen. And you're right, there's so many. You can appeal to somebody's vanity to sell them makeup. Every car commercial just about is appealing to somebody's desire to have a certain lifestyle or to feel a certain way when they get out of said vehicle. So it's just funny. It happens a lot. But this is where, if people aren't aware that they are being emotionally manipulated, it works every time. It works every time.
And churches do it too, sadly. And I think, I don't know if every church does it intentionally, but when it comes down to tithing, you got the music. You just heard the prayer. I just left church, and I thought about it while I was in church. I'm like, okay, you got the music, the worship music playing in the background. The speaker comes up, says a scripture, and people are just caught up in that moment, and it makes them want to give. It makes them want to give. But a side question: is it always a bad thing to use that tactic? Is there a way that you can use it that can be ethical, in your opinion?
I think so. I think there absolutely can be. I think a lot of it boils down to somebody's intention behind it. Because I think I'm a parent, right? And as a parent, there are certain things that I kind of want my daughter to be a little bit afraid of. Like, I feel like as a parent, a little bit of fear is not a bad thing. Like, you need to be afraid of getting hit by a car so you don't run out in the middle of the traffic, after a ball, for instance. So I feel like there are things that that we do need to be aware of. There are things that are dangerous. There are things that we need. Every good movie is an appeal to emotion. So is it always bad? No, not necessarily, but we do need to always be aware of it, right? And like you're sitting in church. Okay, so you felt like there was a little bit of an emotional appeal when it came to the tithe. Does that mean the church is bad and these people are terrible and they have horrible intent? No. but just be aware of it and say, okay, this is a little bit of an emotional appeal. So I need to just go back to what do I feel like God is wanting me to do rather than just getting caught up in the emotion. That's all. So it's not necessarily, sometimes I think people are malicious, but not always. I think we a lot, because here's the thing. Every political side does this. Every religion does this. What you fill in the group, right? Fill in the name. We all do it because it's a human thing. So this is a human thing that we all commit and we all tend to fall for from the other side. So it's not like we're trying to shame. Now I will say, because we come from a background of marketing, there are business people who absolutely use this to their advantage, who are absolutely manipulative with it. Every propaganda political person knows this and they know how to do this. So there are people who study this stuff and they do it purposely, but most people, it just happens by accident.
Right. Totally. And people do it because it works. I mean, it just works. Humans are emotional, and it's probably the easiest to use and the easiest to fall under. So that's why
100%.
we should be aware of it.
Yes.
Right. Moving on to the next one, we have the appeal to authority, which is another favorite one of mine. And I definitely see this. I didn't see it before I heard about it, but now reading about it, it's like, oh yeah, this is everywhere. This is everywhere. The appeal to authority fallacy is it arises when someone claims their argument is true because an unqualified or untrustworthy authority, someone who is not an expert or is biased in the field, says it is. They base their argument on the person's position or reputation rather than relevant facts or evidence. The first thing that came to my mind when I read that was Bill Gates, when he was proposing, the shot or whatever during the times. And Bill Gates, we know who Bill Gates is, richest man in the world, Microsoft, blah, 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 blah. Smart man. I'm not trying to talk bad about him or anything, but he is not
He's not a doctor.
Doctor.
Not a scientist. No.
Yeah, scientist or anything like that. He's not that. But people were listening to this man, just ran about it just because he is who he is. So yeah, I definitely see that everywhere. So I want to hear your thoughts on that and your experiences on that.
Yeah, and how many times have we heard this over the last couple of years? Trust the experts.
Right.
Trust the experts. Okay, really? What experts? Experts in what?
Yeah.
Just because somebody is saying something doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so just to be told, oh, trust the experts, or, trust the science, like there's all these things that are, and there's a difference. I like how you pointed out there's a difference between an appeal, there's a proper appeal to authority, and then there's a faulty appeal to authority, like what you talked about. So a faulty appeal is appealing to somebody who's not really, like every single, like when you see Shaquille O'Neal, right, doing a TV commercial for deodorant or foot spray or something.
Right.
Is he the expert in foot spray? No, not necessarily. He's just kind of, that would kind of appeal to a celebrity type of a thing.
And you said that would be, I may have mistyped this, so that is a faulty appeal to authority.
Yeah.
Someone actually isn't an expert in that particular whatever, and we're listening to that person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, let me give you an example. So a proper appeal to authority would be like if a kid says, why don't you, I can't come to the sleepover tomorrow. Oh, why can't you come to the sleepover? Because my mom said no, or my mom said this. Well, that's a proper appeal because the mom is properly in authority over the child, right? So there are times when it can be a proper appeal to authority. No, but everything you said was absolutely correct. That is when it is a fallacy, is when somebody is biased, or when they aren't an expert, or when maybe they are an expert, but they're biased, like you said, or they've been bought off, or they don't know both sides of something. And so to only appeal to one side will make it faulty. So, yep, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah. And I like how you said, like, listening to your parents, that's a proper appeal. This is your mom, this is your dad. You should listen to your mom and your dad. But the example you gave, Shaq talking about me. Oh yeah, you use this battery here because this battery has 100 milliamps of power and it'll last. Blah blah blah. Like Shaq, you're not an expert on batteries.
Right.
How you done? But some people, and I knew that since a kid. Since a kid, I always found that weird when they place these random celebrities in commercials and I'm supposed to buy it because it's just some celebrity. And I didn't know what that was, but I knew something was like, off with that. And yeah, any other situation have you personally experienced this firsthand?
Well, I think
Yeah,
I think we see a lot of this with influencer society that we live in, right? Everybody is an influencer, an internet influencer. And because they're an internet influencer, whatever the heck that's supposed to mean, we're supposed to take everything that they say as being true just because they said it. And it's almost like they'll appeal to themselves. Like they'll appeal to themselves as being the authority. Some other really good examples, Bill Gates, excellent example. Anthony Fauci was another example that we all have heard, right, in the news. So, I mean, like you said, they're all around us. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to give questions in my podcast for every single fallacy so that we can ask ourselves, because questions are the antidote to bad thinking. And the big question that I tell people is, if you can just get used to asking this one question, this is a good starting point. Just ask, is that really true? Right? Bill Gates gets up and says, oh, we have to do this. Okay, is that really true? Right? And now the reason most people won't do it is because now the work starts.
You cancel.
Right, you could get canceled. You gotta start doing the work to actually find the truth, because depending on who you listen to, they'll be like, no, this is true, no, this is true, and you might have to dig a little bit. And a lot of people just don't want to do that. They either don't want to do the work to find it out, or they're afraid to get canceled 100%.
Right.
Which is another appeal to emotion, right?
Right. It goes back to good. It all circles back around.
Yes.
Yeah, I say get canceled because I said that because once you start questioning things, once you start going against the grain, is when people are like, are you really questioning this? Are you really going it? And that's how, other things can happen. So, yeah, it's always good to be aware that that's going on. Awesome. Appeal to emotion, appeal to authority. Okay, another good one I have is the ad hominem. I think I'm saying that right.
Yep.
Ad hominem fallacy, which is another good one. And that hominem fallacy occurs when one attacks their opponent's character or personal traits to undermine their argument rather than addressing the substance of their argument. The first person I thought of when I read that was Donald Trump, because let's just be honest, he's not perfect. Nobody is, but he's definitely not the perfect person.
Right.
I'm just going to leave it at that. But that does not mean that what he's saying is not, there's some things that he says is not true. So even the most wicked people in history have said some true things.
Right.
And just because he's the most wickedest man ever, not Donald Trump, but just X is the wickedest man ever, doesn't mean he's incapable of making a true statement in a given time. Yes. So what are your thoughts on that, Kathy? And do you have any other examples for us?
Yeah, you summed it up really well. In fact, that's so funny because I had gone back through my notes on the episode that I did on the ad hominem, and it was while he was still in office, and he is one of the examples that I used, he and Melania. So for Donald Trump, rather than people listening to what he was saying, they just called him names, Cheeto, Orange Man, right, all these things, because it's just easier to attack this characteristic of the person than it is to actually listen to the argument and say, well, okay, let's look at the argument itself. Same thing with Melania. What did they do? They made fun of her for having an accent. And what I tell people is I say, never make fun of somebody who has an accent, because it means they are speaking in at least their second language. It could be their third or fourth language. And so that is not ever something to make fun of people for, because they're probably pretty smart to have learned more than one language, which most Americans don't know more than one language, right? So, so that was a really good example. Another one that I teach kids is I say, let's say I were to say, my aunt says soccer is the best sport in the whole wide world. And the other kid comes back and says, your aunt, what would she know? She's a woman. She doesn't know anything about sports. Right? Okay, so that's a great example of an ad hominem. They're picking something about the person making the argument and attack that characteristic of them rather than looking at the argument, is soccer the best sport in the world? So that's just kind of an example of how the ad hominem comes out. And oh my goodness, this happens to me in the comment of some of my posts that I put. I'm out here just teaching what the fallacies are and giving them examples. And I have had people come into my comments and just say, well, what would a homeschooling, Jesus freak know about critical thinking? And I thought, oh yeah. I thought, you just gave me such a good example of an ad hominem attack, because you picked out these two characteristics. I'm a Christian and I'm a homeschooler, and you attacked that versus looking at the fallacy. I'm just trying to teach you. I didn't make these fallacies up, right? They're out there. You could search them like you did and find them. But this is half the comments, I think, in comment sections are ad hominem attacks, where they just attack, what would people who wear green shirts know about anything? Okay, dude, come on. Come on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's something, man. People on the internet they're something else. I have a side question for you. Shout out to my man in the comment section for showing love. I appreciate you. How does your daughter reciprocate you teaching her about these fallacies? Like, what does she say to you? Like, what questions does she ask you? Her being a teenager, I think.
Okay, so it's so funny. At this point, she just kind of rolls her eyes at me because she's 15 and she's just annoyed because we talk about this so much. But she just does that, because she's a 15-year-old teenager. But she can pick them out like that. And she will call us on it when we commit fallacies. She'll pick it out when other people make fallacies, which in the end is really all I care about as a parent. I just want her to be able to pick them out. So I never get offended. Well, she'll be like, Mommy, that's a red herring. And yeah, you're right. You got me. Good job, honey. I just have to take it. I'm like, I taught her this, so I got to take it.
That is awesome. Hopefully, Lord willing, I have children one day. That's going to be one of the first things I teach them, or these. So that's great stuff.
Kids love it. They love it. If you give them some tools to try to pick apart adults, they love it. It's a great fun thing for them to do.
That is so funny. I love it. Great stuff. Okay, so the next one, we got a couple more here. The next one is the Strawman Fallacy. I've heard about this fallacy years ago, but I never really understood what it was. But we can talk about it. The Strawman Fallacy, let's see, where is it? Okay. Is committed when one misrepresents or exaggerates an opponent's argument, creating a straw man in order to make it easier to attack or refute. This often involves taking arguments out of context or misrepresenting them in an oversimplified way. I couldn't think of an example of that. Could you provide one to help me understand the strawman fallacy?
Yeah, so this happens around religion a lot. So for instance, if somebody says, I'm a Christian, oh, you mean you think everybody else is going to hell, right? So they'll take one little piece of a belief or an argument and they'll make that into a whole nother, almost, this is where the straw man comes from, like it's a whole nother person, and then they start attacking that thing. So rather than looking at the argument itself, they pick one little piece of it and start attacking that, and it's like taken totally out of context. It's not really what they were saying, but they just find it easier to pick one little thing and go after that. Here's an example. Noble and I, my husband and I were just talking about this. There's this guy, I think he's a comedian or something like that. He's an Asian dude, and he recently just happened to mention that he likes listening to the Joe Rogan podcast. Well, people came after him, right? And we're like, oh, you're a right-wing fascist and blah, blah, blah. And he got canceled. One of his sponsors called him up and said, we're going to cancel you if you don't delete that video. And this is a straw man, because what they were doing is they were saying, okay, you like to listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, Therefore, and they picked out these little pieces, whatever piece they wanted to see and whatever piece they thought of, and started attacking that little piece rather than saying, well, maybe he just likes the interview. Maybe he's just like somebody who likes listening to both sides and is open to hearing two sides of, right? There's so many other things that it could have been, but every person that was listening just heard what they wanted to hear, and then they started attacking that one piece of it. So that guy I thought was a great example of a straw man.
I saw that very same video the other day. He lost like thousands of subscribers or followers. Like, I was like, wow, all because he said that. And I guess something that would be analogous to that would be, I watched the UFC, so therefore I'm a highly aggressive man who wants to fight or something like that.
Right, therefore you support violence.
Right.
That's terrible.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Just automatically jump to that conclusion.
Yeah,
that I definitely see that. I feel like the media sometimes, mainstream media at least, will combine the appeal to emotion and the strong man at the same time, and just make a hybrid type fallacy situation and use that, take one piece of that and then use emotion to get people to react off whatever that one bit of information that they took. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So it's that's crazy. But thank you for clearing that up for me. And that's definitely a popular one. Last one I want to touch on today is the hasty generalization fallacy. I've never heard of this one before. Let's see. This fallacy happens when one draws a general conclusion from a sample that is not representative or is too small. It involves making rushed conclusions without considering all the variables, making quick judgments based on insufficient evidence. That sounds kind of like a strawman fallacy a little bit, right? Or what's the difference?
Yeah, a little different. Okay, let me give you two examples, and this will kind of clear it up. So, these are both examples that have happened to us in our family. So we're a homeschool family, right? We've homeschooled our daughter ever since she was little. And one of the big things that we get all the time is, oh, homeschoolers are weird. So somebody will say, oh, I knew a homeschool family once, and they were so weird. Are all homeschoolers are weird like that? So what they're doing is they're taking one small sample, this one family that they knew, and they're applying it to everybody that would fall under that umbrella. And the thing I always say is, well, guess what? I went to a private Christian school and there were weird kids there too. Did you have any weird kids in your public school class? Like, come on, this weird kids are out there. Like, they're gonna happen. It's just how it is. It doesn't, you can't apply it to one thing. Here's another example. This happened at our church. So you know my husband, right? He's got tattoos and all this stuff. So he's at church, and some guy that was new, it had come to church, and actually I think he was like a homeless man who had come in, because this happens sometime at church, right? And my husband started talking to him, and he said, so where did you do your time? And Noel used to be in the Army, and so he's thinking my military time, my service time. So he's Fort Bragg.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, the sound went out for a second. Could you repeat what you said? It went out for a moment.
Yeah. So this guy at church was asking Noble where he had done his time at, and Noble's thinking Army time, and this guy was thinking, no, prison time, because of the tattoos on his hands and his fingers. And so he was making a hasty generalization, because for him, if you have hand tattoos, that equals prison, right? That equals prison time. This can happen racially, right? Oh, I knew this Black family and they fill in the blank, so all Black families must be like that. Or I knew this white guy and he did this, and so all white people are like this, right? And we see this so much with race in our country, where somebody has one experience and they generalize that everybody's like this. And it's not true. It's just not true.
Right. Definitely used with race a lot. And I think we
kind of, at least me, I know I fell under this. I'm not in a racist thing, but you know, when you see person A behave a way, you just kind of we kind of just overgeneralize sometimes. You know, that's just a human. It's just a human flaw. You know, it doesn't mean necessarily racist, but people take it to a whole other level. People overgeneralize everything, and like you say, it's just not true.
Right.
It's just not true. You haven't met every person of this particular person to know that this is true or not. So you can't say that. You can't say that. So yeah, awesome.
Okay, since you brought that up, can I throw in a bonus for you?
Yeah,
okay.
Please.
Equivocation. Did you come up with this one when you were searching it all? Equivocation?
You know what's funny, real quick? I was going to ask you to bring up a bonus fallacy. That was going to be my next thing. So you did it. But I haven't heard of that. What is it?
You gave me the perfect segue into it, so I'm taking it. So equivocation happens when you change the meaning of a word in the middle of an argument or in the middle of a conversation. So we use this in puns a lot, like in jokes. There's a lot of jokes about this. Like there's a Calvin and Hobbes comic strip that Calvin says, "What's a peck?" Oh, a peck is a measurement of weight. And then they talk about doing a peck on the cheek, right? So it's the same word used two different ways. Well, this has happened. I have watched this happen over the last decade in our country with the word racism. Growing up, I was always taught that it's racism if you treat somebody differently based on the color of their skin. Well, now it's been flipped. You're racist if you don't treat somebody a certain way based on the color of their skin. And so I see people online having these conversations, having these arguments, and they're using two different definitions of the word racism or racist. And this is what's happened. And most people don't realize that this has happened. And I feel like if we could all get on the same page with one definition of what a word means, it would make things so much simpler. But the definition has been changed. And there's a lot of different words that happens with. And when we change the meaning of words, like words matter, and the words that we use matter, and they're important, and definitions matter. And so if you change the meaning of the word, you change the whole argument. You can change what it perceived, the perceived intent of the other person can be changed by changing the word where that might not even be true. So there's your bonus, it's equivocation, taking the word and changing the meaning halfway through the argument or through a sentence or something like that.
In a broader sense, the whole pronoun, well, you know how that group of people wants to control, they're changing the terminology of gender and sexes and stuff. And what's really, really scary about that, if that succeeds at a grand scale, you're going to really change how people think. You're changing how people think. If you can control their words, you're going to control their thoughts. Yes. So you're changing the whole mental dynamic of everybody. If that really, really takes fire, you know, and it has.
It has.
It is going, but people are pushing back. Thank God, people are pushing back.
Yes.
But for the victims of that, their whole thoughts process is out of whack because the definition, like I said, the definitions have changed. So their thought process have changed, and they're thinking about things completely differently now. So it's not just words. Right. You know, words are way more than just words. Mm-hmm. Words are not a prerequisite, but I guess the afterthought of your thinking. Yeah. You think first, and then you put out the words. But if you can attack the words, you can reverse engineer that, and then think about how they control how a person thinks.
You got it.
It's a important thing to know that that's happening, and millions of people don't know that's happening. Sad. But people like you give me hope that we can push back against that nonsense to get things back on track. But thank you, Kathy, for all what you said today.
You're
appreciate
welcome.
you.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for caring about this topic, because I
Yeah.
feel like this is so important. I feel like we don't have a chance if we can't even see what's happening. We don't have a chance if we can't even see, oh, this is how we're being manipulated, or this is how, this is, they're trying to get me to do this based off that, but that's not even true. So I shouldn't do that. Right? We've got to be able to think critically about the things that are happening in our world today. So thank you for just allowing me to share this. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you. I did have one more though. Do you have any question for me before we go?
What made you even interested in this topic in the first place?
Jordan Peterson. Now he didn't talk specifically. He didn't mention specifically, logical fallacies, but he did mention one. I can't remember which one, and I just thought about man, I need to look into that. So I just Googled it one day, and boom. And like I said, I have to see my video so you can check it out. But I did a whole little video on logical fallacies, and I'm not an expert like you. I just talk about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jordan Peterson is an amazing man. He makes me want to intellectually challenge myself and learn about different concepts and ideas. So yeah, I know for sure when I have children, these are going to be one of the first things I teach them once they start to really, really understand.
Yep.
And I'm glad that you're doing that with your daughter, and that even though you make it on her nerves sometimes, she still knows it and she picks up on it. And I'm sure it's going to stick with her. And once she has children, she's going to pass it on to them. So that's the hope. That's the seed that you planted in her, which is awesome. Again, thank you for joining me. Could you shout out your podcast or maybe any other social media outlets that you're on so people can get in touch with you or reach out to you if they want to talk to you?
Yep. It's called Filter It Through a Brain Cell. The podcast, you can listen to it on pretty much all the major podcast players. Instagram is the best place to find me, Filter It Through a Brain Cell. And if you want, I have a free quiz. It is a meme fallacy quiz where I give you 10 different memes and you see if you can figure out which fallacy each is being committed in each of the memes. So it's filteritthroughabraincell.com/quiz. So I'd love to have you go check it out. Anybody can go check it out. So
I'm going to definitely check that out myself. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate you. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give us a like, comment below your thoughts on the video. Go visit Kathy's Instagram page and shoot her a message or whatever. Kathy, thank you. Tell your husband I said bye, and I said hi, and tell him that I got something for him next time around the mats.
Nice. I will. Thanks, Des. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You have a good day. Bye-bye.